Hello everyone. My name is Magali Orozio. I'm one of the coordinators of the Wi-Fi Gender and Economics Working Group. For those who are not familiar with us, it's a working group of young scholars broadly defined inside and outside academia that get together to discuss and do activities around many things that fall under the scope of gender and economics. I am happy to share more about how the working group works and how you can organize your own activities at the end because it's member-led. So I just help coordinating, but it's up to the members what kind of activities we do. And I'm really, really happy to be here presenting Dr. Gisela Carrasco-Miró for this amazing webinar on Decolonizing Feminist Economics. So I would like to briefly introduce her. So Gisela Carrasco-Miró is visiting assistant professor at the Gender Studies Department at the Central European University in Vienna, where she teaches Decolonizing Development and Feminist Economics. Gisela holds a PhD in postcolonial and gender studies from Utrecht University and a master's in development economics from SOAS. And over 8 years, she has worked as gender advisor and local economic development program specialist for the UN in Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa, as well as independent researcher for several international organizations on social movements. She has also published on decolonizing analysis on politics of development, economics, ecology, and feminism in a range of peer-reviewed journals. So I don't want to steal time from you, Gisela. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm very much looking forward to this. If people would like to make questions or comments on the chat box, that's allowed, but it would be really nice if we can discuss all together by the end of your presentation. So without any further ado, Gisela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Magali, for this fantastic welcome and warm welcome that we've been having already several exchanges via email. So thank you very much, Magali. You are fantastic and you are really a carer. So thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for being here and taking your time, sharing the screen, because now we share a screen, so we share the screen with me. And also a big thank you also to the Young Scholar Initiative and specifically to the Gender and Economics Working Group that I think it's a fantastic initiative. I mean, I've been very impressed with the things that you've done and also for all of you that leading also these changes about talking about gender and economics, which is already quite innovative. So thank you very much for all of you and for this invitation also to discuss this topic that maybe for some of you, maybe you've heard before, maybe it's a little bit, you're intrigued, maybe you're curious, maybe you're already against. So I would like to present a little bit the topic and also have time to discuss with you any kind of questions or anything or stories or lessons or dreams or whatever you feel like. So I will try to speak around 30 minutes or something like that, and then to have also time for you for the questions. So since I don't, this is the thing, no? Like when in the Zoom where you've, it's a little bit cold, so I don't know where are you now based, or if you have specific knowledge about economics. So I will be maybe some things for some of you will be already, you already know maybe some of these things, some of you will be new, so some of the topics, some maybe of the topics of things that will be discussed you are already against, or maybe, but it's okay. So I will try to manage and discuss several things and be quite open. So I will start by trying to make an agreement of what we understand when we say economics and when we say economies, because a lot of times we kind of mix, and it's important now when we discuss to understand and just to have an agreement of what we will mean when we say economics and what we will mean when we say economy. So when we say economics, and usually is with this capital E, we refer to the discipline, right? To the scholar discipline of economics. It has a kind of a body of economic thinking and economic thought that also we will be discussing that. And the other thing is the economy, right? The economy now, for now, we will say that is an activity, right? This is an activity that we do, and then we will go further about that. So this is important, like to first, have like that we have this agreement that we're talking here about two different things, which is true that economics, the disciplines, study the economy, like the activity, right? So there is a relationship about that, right? So having said like now this consensus of when we discuss these things, what is feminist economics here? So we're going to start like first like thinking about what is feminist economics. So one of the things that feminist economics does and start doing is understanding that there are underlying assumptions hidden and never questioned in economics, in the discipline. And understanding that there are some assumptions about the economy, the activity, that needs to be questioned. So feminist economics unveiled and showed economics, the discipline, as being a discipline that is ahistorical and that it has a very simplistic narrative about the economy, the activity. And this simplistic narrative is hegemonic, right? That is considered kind of the only one who explains the activity, the economy. So if we look into feminist economics, we know that feminist economics has a plural character. So it is very difficult to find a specific body of thought. So, and this is actually a thing, and we can discuss that, actually a good thing. So it is plural and it's open to be rethink, to be rethought about what it means and what it is. But at the same time, it has some specific objective, let's say. It's not like everything, we can fit everything, but everything is welcome, but there are specific objectives. And we can find maybe these objectives, and these objectives we can find that is a common thread, that it's usually in this plural character that feminist economics has. And we can find, for example, these objectives, these common threads, when we look in the 90s, when feminist economics in Western academia started to become popular. And we can see here, for example, some of the authors like, for example, I think I put it here, Faber and Nelson, for example, when they explain that feminist economics is about to the main objective is to retain and improve economic analysis by undoing the discipline, here the economics with the capital E, undoing the discipline, because economics, so the discipline, makes central and distinctive masculine concerns. So we can find in feminist economics these clear objectives and trying to dismantle it, trying to unveil the androcentrism and the neoclassical assumptions that we find in economics, in the discipline, about how the economy, the activity works. So usually we find these two main critiques, the androcentrism, so these masculine traits, masculine concerns, like the centrality of these masculine concerns, and these neoclassical assumptions. And from that, we can see like different approaches in feminist economics. So feminist economics, like saying that, it says that economics, so the discipline, privileges the homo economicus, which is the economic man. So feminist economics is saying, well, here, you discipline of economics, you just center this homo economics and you make the homo economics, so the economic man, as the hegemonic, as the center, as the only one who explains how the economy, the activity works. And this is problematic. No, this is what feminist economics says and mentions. And when Fulbright and Nelson also mentioned these masculine concerns, it refers, for example, specifically to its understanding of this homo economicus as human being rational, being self-interest, being power neutral, being timeless, being completely autonomous. So there is no social complexity. and also that enacts his agency through choice, and this economic man is universal. So this rational, self-interest, power-neutral human being is universal. So also it's interesting, and now I'm talking with you here in Barcelona. So interesting, like here in Spain, for example, it is mentioned that this way of understanding, it's called the mushroom man. Also, we can find in some feminist economics texts in the 19th. So this idea of the mushroom man. So it means this idea that beings appear like mushrooms, like poof, suddenly appears, and you don't need care. You are showered, you are fed, and it's fantastic, like a mushroom. So you don't need anything. So you are completely autonomous. And I mean, you don't have, you just have to use a little bit of common sense, and you to understand that this is quite a very weird fantasy, right? That you just appear in the world, like Robinson Crusoe in an island, just completely with everything done, right? So feminist economists interrogates these masculinistic concerns, and also interrogates the neoclassical, that we were saying, assumptions, and also feminist economics discuss how women, and specifically women in the global south, how they do the economic activities there, right? So we can see that an important, school of thought, as a body of papers and case studies and everything in feminist economics, it's also devoted to understanding and analyzing women from the global south and what are the economic activities. So also we can see we can see how feminist economics also try to understand the gender metaphors also in economics, and also feminist economics uses feminist theory and also practice. So this kind of brief, definition, just to put us in context about what do we mean when we talk about feminist economics, it's important to say that this is a tremendous contribution, I would say, and it's not easy, and it's also not an insignificant gain, right? To just dismantle and show all of these things. But after having said that this is very important from feminist economics, we also know that it's been many struggles, and also now, as always, a little bit late, or maybe too late, academia, it's also taking into account how other cultures understands and live and struggles about and concerns about different things in the world. So there is an academic urgency now about understanding how other cultures encounter the West, right? And we can see this through post-colonial studies and decolonial studies and struggles. But feminist economics, and also all economics as a discipline, has been actually quite slow on engaging on this. So now we can say that we have not been accurate, and we have not been actually seriously engaging with the post-colonial and decolonial criticisms in our field. So we as feminist economists, we have not really taken seriously the critiques, our modernism, our ethnocentrism, our developmentalism seriously in our analysis. So because there is still a continuous modernism in feminist economics, specifically towards non-Western women, non-Western cultures, non-Western economies, this has left untouched the hegemonic power of economics as a discipline, as a specific way of understanding the economy, the activity, right? So for this reason, it is important and it is key to decolonize feminist economics. So when a decolonizing approach needs to be taken into consideration in feminist economics. So having a little bit say that, I would like to mention what are the 5 elements that for me are key when we analyze and when we do decolonizing feminist economics. So the first element is that decolonizing feminist economics interrogates the Orientalism and developmentalism of economic discourse. So when we are saying Orientalism, and maybe some of you already know, maybe all of you already know, it comes from Edward Said, right? Like this post-colonial scholar also who explains how the West has been seeing the Orient, right? And here also he plays with this idea of the Orient as the other. So here, when we say that decolonizing feminist economics interrogates the Orientalists, it means that it interrogates the ethnocentrism, the cultural hegemonic understanding of economics, and also questions this tendency of saying what is wrong in the other that we can find a lot of time in feminist economics and in economics in general. So what is wrong with these women doing that in this place in the global South? And now we need to remember that when we say that something is wrong, we are implicitly or explicitly saying that we are doing it right? So here is also a problem with power dynamics and superiority that needs to be interrogated. And decolonizing feminist economics tries also to do that. So interrogates this Orientalism and developmentalism of in economics discourse. So developmentalism is also this understanding, so putting like the centrality of in economics as a discipline with the idea of development, which is this civilization, so this Western mission, so this idea of Westernizing everything. And Westernizing is like this idea also of a specific way of state, like the nation state, who has colonial roots, but also the way how the state relates with civil society organizations and how people actually interacts with each other. So this is one understanding of the economy where development is at the center, right? So interrogates this idea of Orientalism and developmentalism in economic discourse. And one of the main things that is important when we try to interrogate this is to question the ontological separation that we find in economics, the discipline. So the ontological separation that is between culture as identity and life worlds and economies. So resource production, allocation, distribution, so these economic activities. So here, and maybe some of you are economists, or maybe you already know, or maybe you, but all of us, we somehow do economy, the activity. But we see that maybe in our minds, in our imaginary, culture is one thing, and economics and economy is another thing. And even there is this kind of tendency of classifying, right? How culture, it's low, and economy, it's a little bit high sometimes, and maybe for others could be even the other way around, but definitely not related. But we want to question that. Is it true that are they so separate? So let's go and see this. So first of all, the economy as the activity is not something abstract. So it's not a machine fooled by growth, right? And it's not something lying up here with mathematical modeling so that we don't know and then it's suddenly doing things, right? So we can see that the economy, the activity, is not value neutral or outside the culture. Actually, when our activities that we do, the economy is related in the culture. So it's embedded in the culture. So part of the culture is the economy. So we see that the economy of the activity is actually embedded in our social relations. When I go to the market and I want to buy fish, this is a local social relation and it's part of the life world of their identities. So this is culture, as we were defining before. So it's if I go and buy, today I actually ate fish and I ate a very typical Mediterranean fish. So it's also link of some cases of identity sometimes and how these things interlink with us. So we are embedded in the economy. So the economy is not something abstract and the culture is here. So actually the culture is the economy is culture. So we are embedded. So the culture is here, is on the ground. It's not lying in the skies with algorithms and mathematics, and it's important to just take back this idea of what is the economy, the activity. So it is with us. So by saying that that is embedded in the economy, the activity is embedded in our local social relations, it's also in our power dynamics. So how things move, how the economy moves between power dynamics, the culture, the understandings, everything. So it is here. It is not up there, it is here, right? So then we can say that economic well-being is tied not only to the material, that is also, but not only, but also to the cultural, to the social, and to the political as well. So the economy is here, is there, is with us. So, so here for me this is important, and it's something that it's key when we want to interrogate this Orientalism and developmentalism, because by saying that the economy is actually culturally embedded, then we can say that there is a specific understandings of how the economy works and how the economics is that are culturally based. So we can say that many assumptions in economics about how the economy works are based about the Western culture. And we can see some of the traits coming from Western philosophy, from, for example, Cartesian understandings of separation of mind, and body, or how land is separated, and this kind of different understanding. So it is not neutral. So the way that the economics, the discipline, understand and define the economy, the activity, comes from a specific culture, understanding on a specific ways. So by making hegemonic this understanding of how the economy works, economics, the discipline, what it's doing is actually creating a superiority of other ways of understanding economics and other the economies. And there are other ways how the economies, how our activities are done and can be done, right? We will discuss a little bit further. I don't know if I'm making this is clear. So by bringing down this abstract machine fueled by growth algorithm, mathematical modeling up there, I don't know where, and grounding it, so we can question that. We can just look it in the face and actually see it among us and question this superiority, this hegemony, this ethnocentrism, and this developmentalism. And we can contest it and we can resist it, right? So the second important element of decolonizing feminist economics is that decolonization is not a metaphor. And this is important, for me, it's a very important concept that Tukan Yang, the UNAX scholars, actually wrote about. So it is important because now we can see, and it's positively maybe welcome, that many of us, we are talking about decolonization, but we need to understand that this is not a metaphor, for example, for social justice, right? It has a specific understanding and history about what decolonization is. And Tukan Yang reminds us, and different other struggles happening in the world, that decolonization links us to issues about land, about issues about settler colonialism, about that there are moves even in social justice programs that try to do settler move to innocence, to avoid discussing issues about land. And also when we take hegemonic, like, the current probably economics discipline and curriculum that is still there, we can see how the issue of land is practically avoided or not taken with just one of the variables that we do in the modeling. But actually, when we think about decolonization, land is key. So here, issues about land grabbing needs to be discussed. So, and political economic concepts like land, but also capital and labor needs to be discussed and interlinked together. So land is not a variable that we do in a modeling in an abstract way. So land is within us. We are in lands. We are taking lands. There are lands that need to recover. Like there is a big issue here, where there is a lot of economics going on there that we need to dismantle and understand the cultures, the economic culture thinking that are behind all of these understandings. So by saying also that decolonization is not a metaphor, we need to acknowledge that the development of capitalism is based on a colonial, patriarchal, and racist project. So, and we need to recognize that this is the history of capitalism. Right? When we do economic history and we trace the history of capitalism, we see these traces very clearly. So this is important to acknowledge that, to not ignore and just say that it's something abstract again in the air with mathematical modeling, but it's actually a history of racism, colonialism, and patriarchy. And this has implications of how we theorize about capitalist dynamics today. Yeah. So also another way to understanding that decolonization is not a metaphor, it makes it's also to repoliticize economic theory and understanding that economic theory is not neutral, right? So this is one of the other important issues. So the third point, that is the third element in decolonizing feminist economics, or what entails this feminist economics project, decolonizing feminist economics, is that the economies, these activities that we are saying, are all the things that we do to ensure the material functioning and well-being of our households, of our communities, of our territories, of our places, of our societies. So what it is about, we can ask. So it is about sustaining life. So economics and economies, what we're doing is sustaining our life. When we are saying that the economics and the economy, so this activity, and we are bringing it into the ground, and we know that we are doing the economy. When I was telling you that I'm going and I've been today in the fish market and I bought some fish, I'm sustaining life. I'm creating, and it's part of life is at the center. So when we understand that, it changes a lot of things. So when you say, well, Gisela, maybe this is rhetoric, and now we will see that it's not really. So when the economy, when economics and the economy centers the market, we have a different understanding of policies and actions that we do. And it's completely different when we center life, and a different answers or ways of understanding our way of living also changes that. So when I'm saying like the economies needs to, what it is about sustaining life. It doesn't mean that markets disappear, because this is also not realistic. And it's markets, the fisher market that I've been telling you, is also market. The idea is that the market is not the center. So growth is not what defines what our communities, our societies are, but it's life what defines that. So if we think now, for example, in a case, right, that there is, you are living in a community, in your neighborhood, and they, want to just demolish like the building in front of you who live this group of people, because they want to do this big supermarket that will bring more growth and more, more growth, and they say that it never really is the case, but it will bring more jobs, and it's this kind of, supermarket and everything. And then if you put, and then what will happen, that a lot of people in this neighborhood will have to leave a place that actually they want there, and they have their own relations, and they have these little markets. Let's put it like in this way. If you have a policy and an understanding of economics centrally in the market, it makes total sense that let's go and destroy everything, even if there is a forest behind and everything, so let's create growth. So everything, then we will agree, because yes, we will say like, yeah, our center is the market, so we need economic growth. So whatever it is about the forest, or whatever it is about what the people has been living there, or we don't care. So it is okay to do that. But if we understand the economy and economics are centering life, this has no sense, because this will bring, let's say, pollution to the communities. This will destroy some houses actually with the people and communities who actually are doing these communal gardens. There is this also many shops that have been doing there, and actually they have their own communities and economies, that are producing. Let's say, let's put this example. So of course, there are then different cases. It's not always that somebody wants to do a supermarket, it's bad, but we're saying how a same situation, if we look into the eyes of centering the market, has a completely different understanding if what we do is centering the sustainability of sustaining life, right? So decolonizing feminist economics wants to sustain life. Yeah, and this is what we say. It doesn't mean that markets disappear, but markets or supermarkets, it has to disappear. But the question is also about putting life at the center. Is life what matters, not the markets? First is life. and the life of the communities and the well-being of life, sustaining life and not sustainable development, because also we've seen all of this approach in development that it says like, now we have all of this UN Agenda 2030 that is about sustainable development. But what it needs to be sustained in sustainable development, I'm afraid is not life. Maybe it's development. And what then is development? That it needs to be sustained, right? And here we can also discuss that. So, so by understanding this, also understanding of sustainability of life, here we see that different also values goes there. So that it's not just material success that matters, but there are other values that also matters. As we were saying before, when we understand that the economies are culturally embedded, also the values. And we know that when we discuss economics and the economy, there is words like selfishness or solidarities and all of these values that are in our economic discourses. So here we can start also valuing other values that we think as communities we value more. And then we can think, do we want selfishness to be the motto that guides us, or maybe we want solidarity? And what does it entail, this solidarity? So we see that when we discuss economics and the economy, these values also that we discuss, things that define who we want to be as communities. And we need to define that and think through that also. So with this approach also, and what I'm all the time saying, and also when we think about sustainability of life, we are here taking this idea that to take back the economy as a space for ethical discussion about making how to live well. We need to think, not to be defined by somebody, by this machine fueled by growth, but we have to decide, we have the right to decide how do we want to live and how we want to live well. And what does it mean for us, for each communities, right? So this idea of taking back the economy. So the fourth element in decolonizing feminist economics is about contributing to the creation of alternative frameworks. So here it's also important when we are defining economics or the economy, it's not about capitalism. So economy is not capitalism, or economics is not capitalism, right? And sometimes there is this tendency. So we know that there is a massive economic diversity around the world, right? It's plenty of different ways that we can relate in the way how we sustain our lives. And here also, it is important, so this is one of the issues of decolonizing feminist economics, to rethink what is the economic, and understanding this the economic as something plural, contested and situated specifically, right? So, and also it's important when we were saying before about this idea of economics as a discipline. So we can see that now how economics as a discipline has been taking one school of thought as the main and the hegemonic one, which is the neoclassical. Probably we can see that as tendency, but it doesn't mean that it's the only one, right? And here also, maybe neoclassical is one of the schools, but there are also many others that sometimes are ignored in our economics courses. So there is this plurality, this diversity of economic activities in the world. But also here we need to be careful with these Western-centered conceptions of what is diverse and what is alternatives, that also we can fall into the same thing, creating this alternative, economies and economic, which is Western-centered again, and avoids this plurality, this contested and this situatedness, right? And the fifth one, and then I think I'm gonna finish, is recognizing the constant transformation of the subject of feminist inquiry. And here is important because one of the problems in feminist economics that many post-colonial and decolonial feminist economists has been highlighting is how feminist economics centers gender. So gender and economics is the center. But here this is a problematic, right? Because it centers gender and specifically women issues, and usually race is not there, for example. So, usually it's mentioned, but not in the center. of the discussion. And also when we look carefully to neoclassical, neoliberal, capitalist, hegemonic, Western-centric conceptions of economics and economy, we see that the problem really is not about gender. It's not about women, men here, or non-binary people, but also the ideological construction of the groups associated with practice of alternative practices, for example, giving or sharing or loyalty. So sometimes when there is, some studies or approaches to different ways of how a non-capitalistic or post-capitalistic economy can work, the problem is not tackling women or men or non. What the problem is the ways, non-capitalistic ways that these people is doing. So the problem is the social construction. So sometimes the problem is because the base of this economy is based on shared issues. And here, for example, we can see during the pandemic, right? So during the pandemic, I'm sure that many of you have seen different ways of doing maybe economic activities that maybe you were not used to. Like, for example, in your building, you see like mutual support activities. You've been seeing like sharing, all of these things that are actually not quite common in our economic relations. And this has been problematic for the system, but not because they were just done by women or men or non-binary people, but the problem were because of sharing and kindness and solidarity is not in the capitalist framework, right? So when these activities are done, usually are considered like underdeveloped, but not just it's not just about women or men, but all the group is considered like backward and in need of development, right? Because this is the social construction. But then we need to question, are we saying that the economies that we want reject solidarity, reject loyalty, reject sharing? And then we need to question, is this the economy, the culture, the way that we relate that we want? And so I will now finish here because maybe it took too much time, I don't know. And I would like also to listen your opinions and share questions or anything you want to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gisela, for that wonderful introduction to, thank you, to Decolonizing Feminist Economics. I would like to open up the floor. I don't know if you want to raise hands there to talk. Anyone willing to start? Okay, Mariana?
Yes, it's more of a comment. First, thank you so much, Gisela. It was great to hear you. I wanted just to point out the fifth point you said about that feminist economics and this decolonial path that have to go like beyond this gender. I think I highly agree with that, on how gender is the starting point, but we go beyond that. I don't know, are you hearing me or I'm cutting?
Yes, you were breaking slightly, but we were able to hear you. Do you want to turn off your camera? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll try to talk like this. Please say if you cannot hear me. But I just wanted to point out this thing that I think the gender is like a starting point and for the critics of economics, but it goes beyond that. And I wanted to ask and actually just, I don't know, like share my difficulties on this creation of alternative of economics, because I often hear from colleagues, especially now, I'm from Brazil, but now studying in Europe, a master in economics. And I'm usually the exception of the course that tries to point out this decolonial and feminist perspectives. And usually I'm seen as like unrealistic or yeah, not pragmatic. And I don't know how to try to manage this situation, and it would be great to if you share a bit of your experience with that too. Thank you.
Obrigada, Mariana. Yes, thank you. Yes, this is very interesting. It's also happened to me also often. And this is interesting because specifically when we think about unrealistic, and I think that we have a problem with in general, no, a problem of imagination, right? Imagination, and then we confuse sometimes with fantasy. So imagination comes from reality, and from reality we imagine, right? And fantasies are all things, some things that comes out from outside of reality. So when we were saying about the economicus man, and probably what you are studying, and maybe what these people are defending because are the hegemonic discourse, and then you feel protected, is actually quite weird fantasy, right? It's actually a very weird fantasy that you think that we are mushrooms, isn't it? I find maybe we think in poetically it could be like we can be mushrooms, but maybe I'm not in the way that the Homo economicus thinks that we are mushrooms, so that we are really without care, and that we just arrive and pop up from the soil, like. And I think that here then realistics is maybe in another places, but it's also I understand also that we have. And there is this fantasy of, for example, of eternal growth, even though we have this massive planetary crisis. So it's unrealistic and actually not pragmatic to keep thinking in neoclassical terms, because actually it's been demonstrated, even with all the mathematical modelings, that it's actually a fantasy to think that economic growth is driving us somewhere. So also I think that it's always important to think what are the assumptions, that when we were starting like this conversation today, we started like saying like how we question these assumptions that we sometimes take for granted, because it's so hegemonic, this thinking, that also lacks, there is this impossibility to sometimes even to imagine. And sometimes even we don't have to create something, but it's just to look at the things that are around us. And sometimes it's not, I need to travel in a forest to understand really, but sometimes it's we look around, like for example, as we were saying before, if we look what happened in the pandemic, how some other economic ways of people actually were gathering and doing, even if it lasts just a little bit, and maybe some of them even continuing, but it doesn't mean that we need to romanticize this, that it also will be unrealistic and not pragmatic, right? And the same way that the people is romanticizing growth, which is very weird, actually, after we see all the data that we were saying also in terms of poverty, which is a little bit weird, but also it's not about romanticizing, but also saying, well, there are different ways of doing, because we've seen that constantly. And these ways of doing, it doesn't mean that are completely outside the system. Sometimes are with the system and just trying to move apart. Sometimes a lot of things mixing, and especially there's an energy for something better. Right? And I think that this energy for something better that we can see, and people reinventing and doing. But of course, when you start supporting something like that in a super massive hegemonic economic, sometimes it can be very weak, because you have this massive way. And that's why for me also as a scholar, it's important to support like this weak starting, these weak seats, and not criticizing, because it's very easy like to go, oh, you look, they are not pure anti-capitalist, they are not pure they are not pure. Of course they are not. And I mean either, right? I mean, so sometimes we look for this purity, this romanticization, which is not really that, I think. I think I will always be more in the side of imagination, and sometimes not really needed to look very much far away, but sometimes it's maybe looking more around, like joining with even some things that you're already doing with somebody, and you didn't even realize that actually you are based in solidarity, and it works for you better than having a social contract for something, right? And sometimes if we, I will encourage you, Mariana, to just keep with that, right? And sometimes when these discussions, I know that people are so quite visceral, because it's like, is this or nothing else? Is A or nothing else? And it's like, well, it's plenty, right? And isn't it that we want something better, right? But yeah, thanks, Marina. I see other.
Sorry. You want to go Uli, Margarita, and Sensi, and then you answer to all of them, perhaps? Or you want to go one by one? Okay, all of them. Uli, Margarita, Sensi.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting to listen to you. I just wanted to comment on this question also. Maybe it's helpful, I don't know, but recently I listened to a podcast and they were talking about care economics, and they said that around 40% of the GDP, so I'm situated in Germany, so it was referencing to Germany, and they said that around 40% of the GDP supposes like roughly or estimated is related to care work. So maybe, I don't know if that's helping, but sometimes some people need numbers, and then maybe you can say something like this. Give them some numbers, because that's really not something that you can just ignore, I think. And I don't know, if you want to go further, for example, then people say, oh, but I don't know, cleaning the toilet is maybe also related to love or something to your family, but actually that's maybe like a good example that is just something that needs to be done, and people get paid for this, so you can at least somehow calculate it, even so it might be flawed or something, but I think that's not an argument so easy to ignore. Yeah. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, very nice to meet you, Gisela. Hello, Magali, and all the people here. I am Margarita. I am Argentinian, but I am professor in Brazil, in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. I am professor of feminist economics, or trying to. So I love the presentation. I am working on the colonialism and so on, and it's a really new issue here, even if it's really difficult to think about it. No, in Brazil, you should have colonialism everywhere, but you have it in the practice and you don't have it in theory. So the main problem that I think I want to share with you and ask to you is how to deal with the idea of the neutrality of economic thought. One of the main problems that we have, for example, it has to do with the fact that they say economic thought as neutral, as gender neutral, as not situated, not contexted, and you know, it's a very difficult thing, because we have this enormous impact on the capacity of the producing a theory from the South. The Eurocentrism and North American centrism of the creation of theory is very, very huge. And it has to do even with this conception of neutrality and the fact that the way in which our area is evaluated, you know, like productivity metrics and so on. So I don't know, I'm feeling very loose regarding how to deal with this in an institute where it's supposed to be heterodox. However, it's so focused on androcentric thought and so on. So thank you so much. It was really inspiring.
Hi, my name is Zenzi. I'm from Zenzi Patla. That's my full name. Sorry, it always comes up just my first name. But my name is Zenzi Patla. I'm from Cape Town, South Africa. So hi to everybody, and thank you. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Is it Gisela or Gisela? Is it fine? Okay. I just, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for your talk. This was really interesting for me because for one thing, I'm sort of just starting out my journey into feminist economics and into gender studies. And secondly, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing, I'm actually in my sort of final year of my master's and I'm going on to PhD. And a lot of the stuff that we focus on is on that mathematical modeling and stuff that you were talking about. And one of the things is, I find like, I do agree that we're not like that, but I just want to hear your thoughts on this. I do agree that, you know, that isn't how we think and stuff, but given the way that everything is now, because I don't think we're going to be able to break the system now, right? I don't think that we can do that right now. It's a process. It's a process of breaking the system. And it's not, you know, it's people who are, you know, feminist economists who have come before us, as well as us, and then there'll be generations after us who will continue trying to get us out of the system. But given what we have to work with, isn't it, or what do you think, isn't it helpful if we try and find ways in which we can incorporate these ideas that you're talking about into those models as a starting point? Do you think that that is helpful, or do you think that that is actually counterintuitive? That's the first thing I want to ask. The second thing is, I find, or I think that like maybe another sort of helpful way of doing things is a lot of economic stuff centers around data. So, and the modeling, obviously, it's like gathering data, getting the data, analyzing the data, and then making policy recommendations. But what I've seen is, and it ties into what you're talking about, the developmental agenda versus like the life agenda. And again, do you think that it's helpful if we start actually gathering data on indigenous communities? Because those are the closest to what I think we have that are non-capitalist in the truest sense. Because you have indigenous communities in the Americas, you have indigenous communities in Africa, you have indigenous communities in Asia, and I'm sure that if we got data on that and were able to analyze that, we maybe could be able to see what life would be like in a non-capitalist sort of society. And the third and sort of final thing, it's like a comment more than anything. It's so interesting that you talk about just sort of the hegemonic ideas, you know, the Western ideas, because one of the things that I always try and push for is just, you know, sort of personally, is looking at here in Africa, one of the greatest thinkers was Julius Nyerere from Tanzania, and he had like ujamaa, you know, that's a theory, you know, but you never, even in pluralist economics, no one ever talks about him. No one ever looks at that and tries to see what would Africa or any other country, you know, what would it have been, or what would life be if we tried to apply his ideas. But again, his ideas are also based off, when you look back, he drew from, I think it was like Marx and those guys, socialism, which again is a Western thing. So how do you work around things like that? Do you think that we can still turn towards trying to push ideas like ujamaa in economics, or do you think we go even further back and say, no, let's just like sort of go back to the drawing board and start afresh? Thank you so much.
What do you think, Magali? Should I start like maybe mentioning something, or should I listen?
Do you have time to go a little bit over time? I don't know if you have any commitment. Okay, then you can go through them, and then Clara and Maria also wanted to make some comments. Okay, awesome, thank you.
Is it okay? Is it okay with you, Clara, Maria? Yeah? Okay. So thank you very much. I mean, it's I think fascinating conversation that we're having. I'm really, really enjoying, and I think that you're already like full of ideas and interesting things here, like sharing and all the work that you are doing, actually teaching feminist economics, studying also, you know, masters also in economics and going to PhD, but already like having all of these ideas. I mean, this is very interesting, and also that Uli from Germany also sharing the experience also about GDPs and number. So here, for example, and maybe also starting with what Margarita told us, no, and explain like the situation about in Brazil, in Rio, no, at the university. And I think it's important when we think about neutrality. First of all, I want to also mention, like, kind of, maybe you know this, but economics, and you can find a lot of texts that economics as a discipline says about itself as being the physics of social science, right? Which is actually not true. I mean, this is again, like going back with what Marianne was saying, this is unrealistic and it's actually not pragmatic. You are not doing physics and it's okay, right? But there is this classification that also we can see some ideas, right? That what it means to be better or worse, that also it needs to be challenged, also these assumptions, right? So this idea of neutrality, this is very, very important because it's quite, as you say, Margarita, quite common. And one of the main problems of neutrality is because it's not true that we are not neutral, but also the problem is that hides privilege. So when we use this idea of neutrality, a lot of the privileges and the people with privilege are the ones who remain in the hegemonic. So it's this impossibility of having conversations about better societies, better economies, because the privilege and the hegemonic remain. Neutrality means remaining the hegemonic. So, and this is the problem. And one of maybe suggestions, if I may, sharing with you, Margarita, is like, for example, it comes very clear through examples. And then when we put examples, it comes very clearly that this is not neutral. Right, and also even, and now we will be saying these things with numbers, that numbers are important, but also we can say that also they are not neutral. Right? But because we have these assumptions that if we model, we do this mathematical modeling, we do numbers, we become more neutral, and then it's more precise because we want to control, but then it's impossible. And we had it, for example, in the pandemic now, when it could be an example, right? That how all the numbers and the modeling were not enough to explain what is happening to us. It was even constantly wrong. And it's like this impossibility of dealing with uncertainty, that it is not kind of, it makes especially westernized people like completely this impossibility of craziness, and then trying to measure a model like just to have control of life, and then it's impossible, and then you get frustrated, and then you can't know again. And we have billions of examples, right? And even our common lives of things of how nobody really predicted, for example, the crisis in 2007, 2008, and we had all of these billions of economists doing all of these billions of econometrics and modeling, and nobody could really predict it. And sometimes it becomes because humans, we are not that predictable, and we live in this uncertainty like a virus now, and completely we didn't know anything and how even to deal with that uncertainty, right? So this idea of neutrality, even we can go in these kind of psychoanalytical terms now, right? This idea of control freak and psychotic, but also this idea of neutrality makes us this fantasy again, this unrealistic understanding of control. And this idea of control at the end benefits the ones who are in the power and the hegemonic. And this is the problematic here, right? And here, I think that, and then when we have discussions about what is the economy that we want, then we see that we have different understandings and different approaches to something. For example, we can see, if you work in projects or study in things also about issues about environment, the understanding of nature, it's so different if we just gather a group of people from different parts of the world, or even in a classroom, right? That Margarita is teaching. Like in a classroom, if you discuss what is nature, then you will have this massive discussion. And what is the value of nature? And this is actually, then if you start thinking, what is the value of nature? We can see that in economics as a discipline, nature is measured by price. But we know that price is just one of the ways that we can measure nature, but it's not the only one. There's some people who understand nature is valuable just because of a landscape. Other people understand nature as a secret place. It is sacred. Other people understand it's a spiritual. Other people just want it for the good views, this idea of landscape, a good viewing. So we can see plenty of values around nature, but economics just understands one, this price. So here we're not saying that price is bad, but we're saying that price is not the only one and cannot be the hegemonic. And the only way that nature can be valued. So when we are thinking, in Brazil, and then we see who are taking, in the forest, in the Amazons, etc. This is a very clear understanding that nature equals price equals economic growth. But this is an hegemonic understanding of nature, and it's not allowing a dialogue with other understandings of how nature is valued. So other understandings about the economy, how economics could be, are completely devalued, are completely marginalized, are excluded, are discriminated. So here we can see like something like nature that is all the time in economics, environment, everything is absolutely not neutral at all. Many wars, many crimes, many genocides are committed in the name, because of this nature, problematic. So here we can start, if we start with the issue of land, imagine with the issue of food, how any of these things are absolutely not neutral, and economics intervenes in all of them, is embedded in all of them. So here, I think this idea of neutrality is not true, and it's this fantasy of control and measurement that economics has. So I wanted also like to say it like this about these examples, and also thinking about what Sensi is telling us, and I think also very interesting also contribution. So yes, for me it's important that data, here it's, I work with data, so data is not, the thing is the same a little bit when we're saying about markets, right? The data is not a problem, but the problem is when data is if we think as data as neutral, and as we think that data is the only one who explains. So I find very interesting what you're saying, and actually it's needed a lot of data about indigenous people, for example. But then we need to reflect, what do we mean by indigenous, and what are the data that indigenous people want to be valued. And here you will have a data about the variable about land, but what is land? How land is defined? And here we can have many economic theories that are absolutely no neutral. Some are saying that land is a private property, but others saying are communal, right? And here we have different understanding of a value. So data can collect value as long as we define this data. So here we can say that data is not objective at all. So data can help us to describe and support us, but we define the data. We define the value, the variables that we select in our modeling. So we choose what we want to study by some definitions, by how we create something. So all of this is linked in context of non-neutrality. But then it's important that it doesn't mean now to be like, oh, everything is relative, or we need to include everything. No, but we need to be situated in a specific context, right? And how the data in this context, what matters here, and how we discuss that. And it's not neutral. And what are the variables that matter in this? What is the problem that we wanna understand? And how we formulate this question, it's also not neutral, but it means something. So here, this is, and it's actually also, So here I wanted to say that about also the data. So yes, I think I'm talking a lot. I think it was also Clara and Maria.
Yeah, and Sarah after, sorry. And now we close the list and you can wrap up. Thank you. Clara, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're located in the world. I'm Clara, I'm also Brazilian, and I'm also studying in a heterodox center. I'm at Unicamp. So Margarita, I understand your concerns about economics and feminism in heterodox centers. I have also suffered quite a lot in terms of a very male-dominated thinking, and even though heterodox, very driven to this idea of production that is quite capitalist and that is quite centered in what men can offer to economics and the homo economicus framework. But I would only like to talk about how there's a feminist academic in Brazil called Eliette Safiotti, that talks about a knot theory. Therefore, a theory of how race, gender, class, and north-south relations are tied up in a knot in a way that you cannot separate them. They're quite indissociable, and how this is actually fundamental to construct capitalism as the system it is today. So therefore, mainstream economics and neoclassical thinking will obviously discard those variables because they are fundamental to construct the way we think and the way oppression is handled in the system. So I would just like to thank Gisela for the presentation. It was a wonderful talk. I really like this theory, and I think I can see it being applied in this kind of discussion on how gender is relevant, but gender is also not the center of the discussion. The center of the discussion has to be building alternatives and imagining different realities that are possible and that are not necessarily Western and male focused as the ones we live today. So thank you.
Oh, hello, can I go ahead? Yeah, so thank you so much for the discussion from everyone. It's very interesting. I am Maria. I am a PhD candidate in economics.
Maria, your voice is breaking a little bit. Can you try again?
You hear me properly? Is it the microphone or is it the internet?
It looks like the microphone, like it comes and goes.
Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. Sorry for that. Thank you so much for the discussion. I think this relates, Gisela, to what you just mentioned about we define the data we use. And I was thinking we also define the literature that we use and the conversations that we as researchers do. I was saying that I'm a PhD candidate in economics and in gender economics space. And last year, checking my literature review, I realized that it was very much European and US based. And it took sort of that consciousness and also like trying to integrate more diverse voices. And I was thinking if there is, advice that you have or things to integrate, not only decolonized framework of thought, but also a practice of how do we implement this in the day-to-day as researchers. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, okay. Thank you, Gisela, so much for the lecture. I absolutely love it. And I think there is plenty of Brazilians here today because I'm also from Brazil. I'm from the northeastern coast. Yeah, I'm from the state of Bahia, and I'm studying the Federal University of Bahia. And I would like to ask, how could we approach like the gender roles and this kind of trying to measure, especially when you talk about care, which I think we always try, I see that we always try to measure like care and how it's valued in some kind of numbers measure. Like we try to describe how it is important for the GDP. Maybe if we had all the non-paid domestic work measured in numbers, maybe we could add that to GDP and everything. But the thing is, I also see that care can also be a subjective value. And maybe if we only try to, and I think you partly answered that before, but maybe if only try to measure it by numbers and try to put a price on it, it doesn't really solve the problem of how we see and how we perceive gender roles and how we perceive values as a subjective, care as a subjective value. And I say that because when we think about the domestic work, for example, here in Brazil, we see that this domestic work came from the slavery. And what happens today is that given a paid wage to the women, especially women who are doing the domestic work, is not solving the problem of how we perceive and how we see the domestic work, how we see this world of care, and how we see the gender roles in this world of care. I don't know if I made it clear, but thank you so much.
Yes. So thank you very much, all of you. I mean, I'm really enjoying this conversation. It's a pity that we are like just in these screens and we cannot. But I mean, I wanted also just saying like a few things about what you commented, and maybe some of the things also connected with some things that I left from the conversation before. But also, I think it's important, like, to mention here that if something is from the West, it doesn't mean that it's bad, right? And it's something that also before with Zenzi, also I think Zenzi was questioning what we do also with Marxism or that. So it doesn't mean necessarily that it's bad, but the problem is when it's the center, when we just have everything about the West, and because it's coming from the West is better. Right? And here is when is the problem, because sometimes this is from my point of view, right? Because sometimes I think that there is this tendency now, it's everything that comes from the West, everything that comes from Europe, it's bad, wrong. I mean, maybe not necessarily, but definitely we need all the voices. But it doesn't mean that because something comes from Chile is necessarily fantastic, right? But definitely needs to have room. Because it haven't had room before, and maybe needs more space than the Western one, because the Western has been taking a lot of space over many years. I mean, let's say it in this way. But for me, what is important is not following this tendency, right? That sometimes I'm saying like everything that is from the West is wrong. No. So and here also is linked with what also about. I think Maria was also asking about the practice, how we can do as scholars, and it's a good question. And sometimes, I mean, yeah, it's kind of tricky also in the departments that we are working and everything. That in my case, for example, I'm sharing some of the things. It's not that I try to use the feminist practice of the politics of citation. So I really am careful to who I cite. But again, it doesn't mean that I don't cite Western people, but also acknowledging that I am from Spain, I'm Catalan, but and some things all the time it can be tricky. So we can do politics of citation and then just falling again with this binary thinking about goods and bads, or maybe you can have like this politics of citation of being conscious. Right, that I think it's maybe different approach about like, well, how I'm going to cite, and sometimes even can go against you, for example, in the publishing. If you want to publish in a journal and then you do politics of citation, the journal is like, who are all of these people? Like, no. And it's like, what? I mean, and then it's like, no, you need to quote the typicals, whatever. No, and then sometimes it's okay, like if you try to navigate, because also the people that we are in academic institutions who are really capitalistic and really against about the precarity that we're living. And I mean, it's awful. So also we try to figure out how we manage that. So now we're talking about things, but also being careful with ourselves about like, we need to manage this massive precarity also that we're living. So how we manage this, but at the same time we confront something. So, for example, here the politics of citation, and I think also for me it's quite useful ideas of transdisciplinarity. So, for example, I think it's important that going every time more and more. I don't say in against, I think it's not useful. This actually has been a colonial way of understanding disciplines, of classifying disciplines separate. So economics doesn't talk with anthropology doesn't talk with sociology not with the statistics, and then like the economics never will talk with the sociology. And this is ridiculous. So for me, one of the keys is to start with the problem. What is the problem? And then whatever you need then to answer, it is okay. So sometimes you start with a discipline I'm going to discuss from within development economics, and then you just take the scholars and the disciplines and the things from this, but then it limits yourself. But if you have an understanding of what is the problem, then it maybe you can drink from different knowledges, wherever the discipline they come from, right? And also here I will use this politics of citations, of politics of knowledges. What are the knowledges that have not been visible, what they are telling me, but also what are these knowledges, not as case studies, because sometimes we can see like all the Western theory and then a case study from Uganda, or from Ubuntu. And then it's like, well, Ubuntu is a case study. This is problematic, I think, right? And the idea is how Ubuntu can be in the theory. Ubuntu is theory, it's not a case study. So it is an appendix of the Western thinking. No, how Western thinking can be changed by Ubuntu, for example, or the idea of communitarian feminism in Central America, but how theory can be changed. So can we learn? How can we relate with this knowledge, not as case study, not infantilizing, not as something a little bit funny, not just make this little move, but it's actually how can change us, no? And how this situate ourselves and how we relate to that, coming from our position also, and what does it mean? No? In my case, as a European Western, how I situate myself, but also being careful, because sometimes I've seen like all of this research, and probably even my own, and that trying to situate, and you do like this autobiography, and then it's like this research about yourself, and because I'm white, and because I'm then and me, and then it's like, and then Ubuntu, and it's like, and then it's like more an autobiography about yourself. And this is, and trying to be so self-conscious that then your ego is everywhere, right? And then trying to, because I am privileged, because I'm studying in a university, and then I'm white, and then I'm Spanish because and then it's about yourself and not about the topic. So also with this self-reflection, also careful, managing how we do that, no? I would say you these things. And about just, about also this idea of care that also we were saying, like Clara was saying, about also the GDP and how it's also subjective, and yes, and the gender roles, yeah. And I think this is interesting, and here about like also all of this discussion of care. And then if you see, and I'm not saying it is wrong, but what I'm saying is the tendency is all the time to putting price to care, and maybe not changing what is the values and what is wrong about caring, how the gender roles, it seems that we need to make masculine all of us, or how the empowerment in places like here in Spain is just to give, like, the cleaning things to the migrant, right? And now the, Western women were free and liberated and empowered and gender roles, but then is the racialized one who is doing this, right? But we're not really changed. And then, yeah, Western men can have like this. Did we change the structure? Is transformative the move, or is just an add-on about what we're doing? At the same time, I'm not saying that, I know that these struggles are quite tough, and also I recognize the colleagues, feminist colleagues, that actually doing like really tough work, like really working with the care, and it's so difficult actually to change the structures, that sometimes some of these moves also are big victories at the same time. But also, as long as we don't lose maybe sight about what maybe we want to do, no? That is more transformative approach, I would say. Yeah. So thank you. I'm sorry we'll keep talking, but thank you.
I think we would keep listening to you, but I don't want to keep you too long. Thank you so much, Gisela. This was an amazing discussion, and thank you everyone for joining, but also like for engaging with this conversation. I think this makes the experience so much better, and I sense there is a lot of interest in this, and I hope so that this is not the last. This is only the first of a series of activities on the topic of decolonizing feminist economics. So perhaps a round of applause for Gisela. thank you so much, everyone. And I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.